My name is Diana Kushner, farm name Arcadian Fields Farm, and I think this is my 21st year here. We're located in the middle of Arcadia State Park, so on three sides we're surrounded by forest. And Arcadia was a place in ancient Greece where people were especially content. Well, my marketing model has run full circle. When I first came here, I sold at a CSA, and I sold at a farmer's market. Actually, I was sold at the Hope Street Farmer's Market when it was just a rinky-dink, tiny little farmer's market, and if you made $100 or $200, you were pretty excited about it. And I sold to restaurants, which meant I had to go knock on the doors of restaurants because there was only 2 other farmers in the entire state, I think at that time, who were selling to restaurants. So I did those 3-pronged approach, decided I didn't like CSA, and really focused on the restaurants and farmers market. 15 years passed and farmers market became incredibly overwhelming, so busy, and I'm getting older. So I dropped that and decided to focus mostly on the restaurants. But then there's all these other farmers selling to restaurants now, so I went back to the CSA. In this pandemic year, also selling a little bit to restaurants. There's some chefs I just love and I want to just continue selling to them. But also Market Mobile has really shifted, and now they're selling more to individuals. So I'm doing a lot of individual sales through Market Mobile as well. At Market Mobile, it used to be restaurants that ordered, but now there's a lot of individuals ordering as well. So they get orders from hundreds of individuals, and those individuals can order from lots of different farms and different food products like salsa and seaweed and other stuff. And so I submit what I have, and then people order it, and then I harvest it, and everything has to go in little bags, because one person might want one bunch of kale from me and one bunch of beets from me, and then stuff from other farms. So there's a lot of labeling and a lot of bagging.
So you said these are succotash beans, supposedly of Narragansett origin.
Yeah, that's what I was told.
And you got them from who?
I got them from Matt at Chez Pascal, who got the seeds from the Stone Barn Farm that they're trying to bring back a lot of old varieties.
Yeah.
Different varieties. So anyways, not only are they beautiful, but these were like the best beans we've ever eaten in our life. Like, are they going to dry a little smaller than this, like probably like this, but they look like, it's hard to see, but they look like kernels of corn. So, and they become this, they just are
beautiful.
Incredible. They just look like kernels of corn, and they're absolutely delicious, like texture, flavor, like you never want to eat another bean. And what's also really neat is before they're totally dry, we're just opening them up. So they start off like this incredible lavender. Yep. So first off, we're a certified organic farm. I'm not so keen on having certification per se, but it means a lot to customers. I would follow organic practices regardless of whether I'm certified or not. We're a diversified vegetable farm, although we don't grow all the vegetables that a lot of people grow. Mainly I like to focus on the ones that do really well here. So if there's vegetables that just don't do well here, I don't grow them. Or vegetables that I don't like, I don't grow them. Like I don't like zucchini, I don't like harvesting it. So members of my CSA don't get zucchini. They can just go to a farm stand and buy zucchini. So we focus on what we like to grow. I love to weed. It's the one thing in life that absolutely calms me down. So the crazier the world gets, the nicer my farm gets. I start off when I plant, I might use the cob and do some cultivation, but mostly I hoe. Almost everything is hoed. Except if I miss something, I do these things called weed walks, and usually it's right before dark, something terrible has happened, and I just go out and collect any weeds that might go to seed. So it's kind of a combined therapy and growing practice. Believe it or not, in this whole field, this giant acre, when the cover crops are first coming up, I'll walk around in here, and if I find anything I don't like, which is basically any weed, I'll pull it up. So to me, it's worth the time to take to get those weeds, even in a cover crop, because then I end up with a situation like this where I haven't actually done any farming except for harvesting in 3 weeks. I have a lot of kale here, and there's a small backstory behind it, which is I deliver to restaurants, and I kept seeing this one restaurant that had the sign saying organic kale smoothies, and we sell local food. And I said, well, is your kale local? And they said, oh no, we can't find anyone who can grow enough kale. So I grew an extra row of kale, and it turned out they only needed a tiny bit. So I got a hold of people who started harvesting this kale and giving it to food pantries. So it's grown since then. Now I've got about 15 rows of kale. I need maybe 1 or 2, 3 for me. And the rest, Hope's Harvest comes and is distributing to food pantries.
That's fantastic. So is this the first year Hope's Harvest has been coming?
This is the second year that Hope's Harvest is coming. Last year I grew 5 rows of kale, and they donated over 2,000 pounds of kale to people in need.
Wow.
So this year my goal was to donate at least 5,000 or 6,000 pounds of kale.
So how does that work with them? First of all, do you pick it for them or do they pick it?
Hope's Harvest is a really easy organization to work for or work with because my responsibility is only growing the kale. They bring everything else. They bring volunteers to harvest the kale, containers to put the kale in. They make the contacts with the food pantries. All I do is grow kale. So it's easy. I get to play a really valuable role in helping people, especially now with the pandemic and more people than ever being food insecure. This is the one thing I can do as a human where I can feel like I can make a difference in people's lives. Hope's Harvest gives farmers really generous compensations, and I accepted some compensation from them, which covers the cost of seeds and labor if I had to hire labor, fertilizer. But I didn't want more than that. I wanted to also donate some of my, not so much my time, but donate the space in the field that maybe I could have used for growing something else and selling, because it was important to me. Tractors are an essential part of farming here. I have 2 of them. I've got an International Harvester, I think it's 385. It's from the 70s. It's super old, maybe 35 horsepower, and I do mostly primary tillage with it, and then I pretty much park it for the summer. And I have a Farmall Cub that pretty much does everything else.
So when you say primary tillage, can you describe your tillage practices?
These days, for tillage, I have a chisel plow, and I try to get the chisel plow through in the spring for most places. I also have a Perfecta, which I will run after the chisel plow, that makes a really nice seed bed for planting into. If I've done a crazy cover crop that needs incorporating, I have a regular disc harrow. I've gotten away from using a regular moldboard plow because the soils here are so shallow that I realized I was just bringing up a lot of subsoil.
What about how do you do your seeding here? I see some pretty nice little beds of greens here.
I've got 2 seeders that I like to use. One is the 4-row pinpoint seeder that Johnny's uses, and you can see, say this arugula was done with that, and it comes out perfectly spaced. You can also use it for radishes or turnips, and it comes out where every single seed is going to be a radish or turnip, and you don't have to thin at all. So that's fantastic. Some crops the 4-row pinpoint seeder doesn't do a good job for, and so I use your push earthway seeder. And I use that for dill and cilantro.
And also beets and chard?
I transplant beets and chard.
Oh, okay. And which do you use for your spinach?
For the spinach, I use the 4-row pinpoint seeder. After I put the seeds in, I went over with the earthway seeder to press the soil down so there'd be better soil-seed contact.
I have seen that you have a very prosperous garden here, Diana. Since I've been at URI 8 years, I've been out here pretty much every season, once or twice anyway, and there's always just a huge abundance. Everything looks good, and despite what you may say about pests, you manage things pretty amazingly well here, particularly your weed management. So I'm wondering about your fertilization practices or how you maintain soil fertility on this patch of land, which, by the way, is pretty darn sandy.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do a particular job of maintaining soil fertility. I was lucky when I first came here, no one had grown anything in these fields for like 50 or 60 years. And so the fields had had a chance to build up a surprisingly large amount of organic matter for this area, something like 5 or 6%. So my goal is really in keeping the organic matter at that 5 or 6% and not in lowering it. To do that, I do a fair amount of cover cropping. Actually, this field was in cover crops for about 3 years before this, so it hopefully has a lot of organic matter in it. But it's still really difficult to keep the organic matter high. We've had fun with yellow blossom sweet clover, sorghum Sudan grass mixed with something like cowpeas, Japanese millet, a lot of really big biomass producing, and with the clover, nitrogen producing summer soil crops.
Wait, digression. How were you able to keep this field, which looks like a pretty substantial field, in cover crops for 3 years? Did something change?
Okay, so I married a Canadian documentary filmmaker who specializes in making films about Arctic sea ice. So in 2017, I went with him to 500 miles from the North Pole with a young polar oceanographer who studies the oldest ice floes on Earth. And we went with him so he could study these flows. It was a kayak expedition. When we got there, we discovered the old ice that was supposed to be there, that climate models said would be there, wasn't there. So we ended up in this crazy 6 weeks trying to escape for our lives. That winter, we went through our footage. Oops, we needed a little bit more. So the next year, I planted a whole bunch of stuff to be harvested from August on, and we went back to that same location to shoot more. The following year, my knees were really bad. I needed surgery, which I've just had. So there is extenuating circumstances that made me grow less. So last year I grew a lot. I just didn't grow in this field. I was saving it for the pandemic.
Okay, all right, good story.
In addition to doing cover crops, I also use fertilizer, which I have mixed emotions about. I use Crayer's products. They come from some industrial chicken house. I don't want to know anything about those chickens, but I'm using their poop here. Mostly I use the one that's higher in potassium. Some crops that are heavy nitrogen feeders, like the brassicas and the alliums, I'll side dress partway through the season with the high nitrogen fertilizer.
You've said that 21 years you've been growing vegetables on this scale. And by the way, what's your acreage that you grow on here?
I can grow a little over 3 acres of vegetables. And when I first came here 21 years ago, I was growing 3 acres of vegetables. But in the past few years, I've been cutting back. I think farming's gotten harder since I began farming. I think when I first came here, it was easier. Not so much because I was younger, but because there were fewer pests. I kind of knew what pests were going to come, and I knew how to deal with them. And now it seems like every year there's something completely unexpected that I've never dealt with. I call up Andy or Heather, and they come over, and often it's a head scratcher for them. So just to name a few examples of problems that weren't around when I first started off is there was no downy mildew in basil. Basil was totally fine to grow. That little pest, Andy, you can help me, on the blueberry plants, the winter moths.
Oh yeah.
Those weren't a problem when
Yes.
I first arrived here. This year I've had this incredible problem with Japanese beetles and Japanese beetle grubs, which have actually killed most of the crops behind me. Most of my fall crops are now dead because grubs have been eating the roots of all my new transplants and all of my direct seeded stuff. And I've never had this problem. Another year, garlic. I had anthracnose on my garlic. I lost my garlic scapes. It just goes on. And so I feel like I don't know how to farm anymore with all of these new pests and diseases, which I think are really coming here from a changing climate.